Hello, thanks very much for joining us for what's going to be a series of vlogs about mediation and the alternative dispute resolution landscape. My name's Claire Henley and I am a commercial mediator and my company is called CachetAssociates.
Hi, I'm Caroline Knowlesley. I work for Cognitive Law and specialise in property litigation, property disputes.
Thanks, Caroline. The reason that we're doing these vlogs at the moment is that at the end of May, there was a change in the law, which meant that all disputes that would go to civil courts, which had a value of less than £10,000, now have a compulsory mediation step in the process. We thought it would be useful just to give a little bit of background about what mediation looks like and how it can work alongside any litigation that may be going on for disputes. Throughout the vlogs, we'll be talking primarily about commercial mediation, but the process are equally applicable to civil disputes and also can be used as mediation for a workplace dispute. I mostly tend to talk about parties as a mediator. Caroline tends to talk a little bit more about clients, referring to the people who are part of the mediation. Caroline, I just mentioned the fact that disputes with a £10,000 less value now have this compulsory mediation step. Do you think that's something that's likely to be extended in the future?
I do think it will at some point, just because the court system is overburdened with the pressures of court cases, and mediation gives people the option to try and settle without the need to go to court, which would obviously take some of that pressure away.
Thank you very much.
What do
So,
you think mediation should be as first steps, or do you think it should come later?
well, I think with all of these things, the sooner you can start a mediation, the better. It's not impossible for mediations to kick off once there has been a longer standing dispute. But really, if you get mediation in early on in the process, it can be really helpful in helping make that resolution going forward. So, if a dispute arises in the course of doing business, the first thing that you would look at doing is talk to other people in your business. If you were a business owner, you might have a partner or you might have an advisor that you would talk to about the dispute, decide whether mediation is something that would be a good way of resolving the dispute. At that stage, Caroline, somebody might also come and talk to a lawyer.
Yes, you can engage a lawyer at any stage, even if it's pre-litigation, to take you through the mediation process and just assist. As equally, obviously, if you're partway through litigation and there is the need to mediate, then the lawyer can arrange that too. It doesn't particularly matter. It's really of what's beneficial to that particular case. It's case by case basis.
Yeah, thank you. And what is really important is that mediation does have to be agreed by both parties. You might have a dispute with a supplier who hasn't supplied something correctly and might be withholding the payment because of that. You would have to make sure that the other party was willing to also mediate, because a mediation can only go ahead where both parties have agreed that they are willing to mediate and they have signed an agreement to say that they will mediate. Caroline, have you got any examples of clients that you have had who have been reluctant initially to mediate?
Yes, I think it's relatively common for people to not want to mediate because they almost see it as giving up, giving in, giving too much away too early, perhaps, where actually it can be of huge benefit to resolve matters sooner in terms of costs, certainly. And it's a case for the job of the lawyer, really, to take them through and understand fully the implications of mediation and why it can be beneficial and why it should be a serious consideration even ahead of litigation.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. And that kind of leads me on to a question that I often get asked: how would I choose a mediator? And what I would say is that it is very important to do some research, make sure that you are very comfortable with the person that you have chosen to run your mediation, have a look at their background and their experiences, and have they got experience in your particular type of dispute, because that could be useful. Generally, any mediator will be very happy to have a 15 or 30-minute discovery call initially, just to see how you feel like you would benefit from working with them. It's then about getting the other party to agree that that's the right mediator as well. There are several different organisations like the Civil Mediation Council, CMC, which have lists of accredited mediators. That's a good place to start. Caroline, what would be your approach if a client came to you and said that they wanted to go down the mediation route? What would you advise in terms of getting the other party to join in as well?
Usually, in my experience, you would put forward 3 suggested mediators, and that might be people you've worked with or people with a specialist background, because sometimes it can be a little technical and it can be advantageous. But the mediator is not making a decision, but it can be useful for the mediator perhaps to know what options are available, certainly if you're talking about something like transfer of land. So someone with that expertise may be useful because they have an idea of what the settlement options might be or what they might look like. And then it's cost as well. So if you have a relatively small claim, you don't want to be spending thousands on mediation. So that's also something to bear in mind, because you can sort of go up exponentially, really, in terms of who you instruct. Some barristers are qualified to mediate as well. If you go into London, obviously the costs usually are far higher. So it's taking all of those things into consideration and having sort of a little bit of sense about that choice as well. Usually put, say, forward a selection to the other side, and they may do the same, and then you try and agree someone out of those suggested mediators.
Yeah, so there are quite a few steps before you even start the mediation, and those are very important as well, because it is important that once you've decided to go ahead and committed to it, that you do feel like you have the right mediator to take both the parties through. And what can also happen, depending upon the nature of the dispute, is that the mediation might actually also run alongside a litigation process. Ideally, we would like to start a mediation, as I said earlier, as soon as possible once the dispute has arisen. But that doesn't mean that it can't be kicked off further down the line. And it certainly doesn't mean that any litigation has to stop before the mediation takes place. What's your view of the timescales in terms of when would be a good time to start mediation, or if a mediation could run alongside the litigation process, Caroline?
If you have sufficient information at the outset, then I don't think there's absolutely any harm in trying to mediate right at the very beginning. It all depends on what information there is available and whether stuff's been shared, I think, between the parties. Sometimes people feel that they're withholding information is a bit of power. And obviously with mediation, you're looking to try and share all the information and try and reach a resolution, which is why sometimes further down the line in the midst of litigation, it can be advantageous, because the parties may have exchanged their documents and everyone is more open to seeing what evidence and information's there as to whether a mediation is a sensible option to try and resolve it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Well, I think we'll find that first one up there. We've talked about when you might be compelled to mediate, depending upon the size of your dispute. Also about what you would then do as those first steps, both individually, within maybe your family or within your business, again, depending upon the nature of the dispute, and then setting about going to find a mediator and what you would need to take into consideration. So I hope that's been useful. And we look forward to seeing you on our next vlog. Thanks very much.
Thank you.